Welcome back to another one of Nathan Bell's commentary videos. Today, Nate is going to share a few perspectives on the conflict between Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot about the Israel-Palestine issue since it flared up with the recent terrorist attacks and then Israel's response. And I've monitored the issue over the years, and a lot of my activist mates have been in the community, have been organising pro-Palestinian rallies, which I support. The first thing I want to say is I do think the Jews should have their own country. You know, there are people, and it's appropriate that they have their own country. And I recognise that the Jews were in that place throughout history, and they have a historical attachment to that place. But I just think the regimes that are running Israel, they're bad regimes because they're very violent, you know. And what's been done to the Palestinians, being locked in a small section of land behind a wall and deprived of necessities for life, it's like torture. And the human rights have absolutely been violated. Israel was given a certain amount of land, and then they've progressively taken more and more land aggressively over the last 40, 50 years. They're stealing land, and they're not. The regime is so caught up in this idea that Israel is entitled to the land that they're absolutely denying any acknowledgement that the Palestinians were there as well. You know, it's their land as well. It has to be shared land. They have to share it, and they have to find a solution where both groups of people can share the land. You know, because the Palestinians have been treated appallingly over the last few decades. And now, as for Hamas, a lot of terrorism is religious fanaticism and motivated by religious beliefs. But I do believe in the case of Hamas, they're a group of people acting out of anger and desperation, which is justified. You know, their anger, how could you not be angry? Their people have been locked behind a wall, their land has been stolen, they've been pushed into a small part of what was previously their country and deprived of human rights and necessities. What do you expect? You know, and it's this thing that people do, and I've seen people do this a lot in my life. It's like bullies, you know. It's this thing where a bully will attack someone, and they will attack them, and they will attack them unrelentingly, and they will abuse them, and they will be coercive, and they will say sinister things, and they will even strike them and physically assault them. Then when that person turns around and reacts with violence, they turn around and blame them. You know, it's this sickening thing. It's like, what do you expect, you know? Because I've got to say, I'm a big believer that oppressed groups have the right to use violence. I've studied violence extensively in my life, and I recognise that if people are being abused, they have the right to defend themselves. You know, I'm not a pacifist because I recognise that horrible atrocities happen in this world, and if you are having horrible atrocities reaped upon you, you have the right to react with violence and in defence, and I see it as defence. So I think people who are involved in Hamas are probably very bitter, angry, resentful, cranky people. And I think that they want the best for their people, and they want to protect their people. Now, that's not to say that I condone terrorist actions or the actions of Hamas. The kidnapping of people and the brutal murders of innocent people at music events and civilians is terrible. My view is military conflicts, and this is what the UN says, military groups should target other military groups, and they should not target civilians. Civilians and everyday people should never be targeted in military conflicts, and that has to be the rule. So Hamas has absolutely crossed a number of moral lines when they've attacked civilians and attacked innocent everyday people in Israel. That's not appropriate. Military conflicts have to remain between militaries, and civilians cannot be targeted. So I don't condone the actions of Hamas in targeting civilians, but what I will say is, what do you expect but a violent reaction given how the people of Palestine have been treated by consistent Israeli leadership? They continue to oppress the human rights of the Palestinians to take more land. How could you not expect a violent, aggressive reaction? You can't consistently bully and abuse people and expect them just to cop that and not respond. So if you're going to consistently bully and abuse people, you have to expect that they will react with violence and that they will view themselves as acting in defence, right? So, and I think if America wants to be seen as a righteous nation of justice, they absolutely have to pull support for Israel, because Israel's current bombardment of Gaza is terrible. We know that hospitals and schools and other civilian establishments are being targeted by Israel. We know they're going in and brutally massacring people. As my activist mates say, it is almost a genocide. So Israel, and how can Israel think that because a terrorist organisation that exists within the Gaza Strip has attacked their population, that gives them the right to bomb schools and hospitals and kill innocent people? Again, military conflicts must remain between military targets, and military groups like the IDF must only target military targets. They're not targeting Hamas, they're targeting innocent Palestinians, and they're killing innocent people, and they're blowing the shit out of the place. So it's a terrible conflict, and I worry that it will escalate and lead to a global conflict, World War III, which I predict, as you know if you've watched my previous videos, because it's inevitable this terrible world is going to burn in a nuclear war, because conflict just keeps happening, and people can't resolve their differences. But America has to if America wants to be seen as a righteous nation of justice, they have to pull support for Israel, because what Israel is doing is abhorrent, it's disgusting, and they are killing so many people, and this is after decades of oppression. So, the whole thing just exemplifies for me why I think there will be a nuclear war, because it just shows me how willing human beings are to torture and abuse each other. Palestinians are entitled not to live behind a wall in a small section of land that was previously theirs, and they are entitled to have access to the healthcare and the supplies and the food that they need, which they have been deprived of for decades. We should be. I don't understand how people can't see that what Israel is doing is wrong, and what they have been doing for decades is wrong. It's just a terrible situation. So we have to pressure the Australian government to abandon support for Israel. And we have to pressure the American government to abandon support for Israel. And it's very disappointing that a group of people who were so heavily oppressed by the Nazis would be given a place to call their own, and then would immediately turn around and start oppressing another group of people. And it just reminds me why I've lost all faith in humanity altogether. You think of all the people, the Jews, and not all Jews support Israel's action. I want to be clear on that. Many Jews don't support what Israel is doing, but you would think that of all people, this group of people who were victim of their own attempted genocide would not turn around and then start oppressing another group of people. But that's exactly what they've done. But it's the leadership in Israel that is the problem. It's all very disappointing, and just reminds me why I've lost faith in humanity, and I wonder if it's going to lead to a global conflict. But absolutely my view is that Israel is in the wrong and Palestine is in the right, and I don't condone the actions of Hamas in attacking civilians, but I do understand these people are rightly angry at what has happened. Their land has been stolen from them. They have every right to feel this anger that they feel, and that doesn't justify their violence. I think the UN has to do more. Sometimes I think the UN should have ability to use force in situations like this. The UN is so toothless because they can't use force, but we can't have the UN start doing military interventions into countries. Sometimes I think the UN should be able to do military interventions. One thing I've come to realise over the years of thinking about war and conflict is sometimes military interventions are just, and they're the only way to resolve the issue, because some people are just such brutal monsters that how can you can't stop a brutal monster from being a killer without using force against them. So sometimes I think the UN needs power to use force in situations like this, but it's probably best that retain that the UN don't have the ability to use force, because otherwise things would just escalate and then the UN would conquer the world. But the whole global community is going to have to come together and discuss what's happening in this Israel issue, because what Israel is doing at present over the last few months in Gaza is genocide, and it's mass murder, and it's not acceptable. So there's some thoughts I wanted to share about the Israel-Gaza conflict, Palestine conflict. Drop a comment in the comment section about your thoughts on Israel and Palestine.